All right. So let's go back to the consumer's problem. We talked about a demand curve, right? We talked about here's the person's demand curve. Here's price and here's quantity. So this might be PI and this might be XI. Let's use my usual notation. And then there's some demand curve, right? XI of PI and then a bunch of other stuff. But I'm not, the other stuff I don't care about. I'm just going to leave the other stuff out of the picture. All right? All right. Now, how would you describe a demand curve? What is a demand curve? Be careful in your wording. What is it? Is it how much this person would be willing to buy at a given price? What is the demand curve? The demand curve is how much this person would choose to buy if he can buy any quantity he wants at that price, right? Everybody agrees with that, right? That's the experiment that generated the demand curve. We assumed there was a price. We assumed he could buy as much as he wanted at that price. And this is the amount that he would choose, right? It's his preferred choice at that price. But you see why that's the case? Because that's what we did. We asked, all right, you can buy as many of these goods as you want at each price. Which point would you choose? Which is the best from your point of view? So the demand curve describes his preferred point. I didn't talk about this, right? Did I? Okay, I haven't done this. Okay. I'm old. I forget what I've talked about. All right. So what does that mean? What does that mean? What it means is if I want to think about this person's preferences in this space, right? I can think about people having preferences over prices and quantities, right? That is, I can think about instead of letting them choose their quantity, I'm just going to offer them combinations. This quantity and this price, another quantity and another price. I can think about their preferences. What this model says is his preferences are such that the best point anywhere along that line is that point. Everybody agrees with that? That of any point along a horizontal line, that has to be the best one. Because that's the one he picked. He wouldn't have picked it if it wasn't the best one. So points to the left of that point are worse, and points to the right of that point are also worse. Right? So what does the indifference curve have to look like? His indifference curve, well, he clearly prefers moving this way, right? Everybody would agree with that, right? For a given quantity, he would prefer to pay less. There's no question down is always better. But is going right always better? No, going right is better on this side and worse on that side. So his indifference curve actually is horizontal at that point, right? That's what his indifference curve kind of looks like. It's actually upward sloping on the left and downward sloping on the right and maximized at that point, right? So you can think about it. His budget line is sort of the horizontal line, and he chooses the point that's the best one along that line, right? That's how his indifference curves look like. So that's what his indifference curves look like. But you see that? Let's assume I got this economic theory, and I see a guy, and he's not on his demand curve. He's off his demand curve. And the question is that a big deal, little deal, whatever? Or should I be really bothered as an economist that this guy's pushed off his demand curve a little bit? I should be? Why? Okay. Okay. So let's assume I see this guy. How much effort should he make to try to make sure he's on his demand curve? Well, look at this picture. in this picture, how much effort should he make to make sure he's on his demand curve? Not a lot. Depends, though. Depends on what his alternative was. If he's off his demand curve this direction, I would say I'm not very worried. I would, in fact, think people's demand curves ought to be pretty fat looked at this way, because there's not that much incentive to get your decision exactly right. So if he's trying to figure out whether this thing tastes real good or just tastes kind of good, whether he's really trying to figure out whether he should get the hot dog or the hamburger, he shouldn't spend a whole lot of time trying to figure that out, because on the margin, there's not that much incentive to get it exactly right. We would expect people to be pretty open to suggestions, for example. When people ask him, hey, maybe you should try this. Well, okay, fine. As long as it's not too far away from what I want, I'm not going to resist it very much. Or if I'm in the supermarket and I say, I'm not going to offer all the products. I'll offer some, and I'll choose for you. And as long as I choose pretty close to what you want, you may be willing to cede me that right for a very small payment. If I give you a nickel, you might say, okay, fine, I'll let you choose. Now, on the other hand, if I could have been here, right? If I could have been here, and instead I was here, the cost to me of that is high, right? Because then my loss is like this entire rectangle, right? That is, my loss of getting pushed vertically, of paying more for what I wanted to buy, is much higher than my cost of being pushed horizontally. So while at the same time, I may let that supermarket influence my decision as to whether I'm going to buy Coke or Pepsi or buy, one kind of laundry detergent or another, I might not care if I'm getting pushed horizontally back and forth. I do care a lot about going to a supermarket that charges me more than the other one. So I might shop real intensively on price, and then when I get in the supermarket, just throw crap in my cart, right? That's kind of what this model says, right? I'm like really focused on getting the best price, but once I get to the store, I kind of, close enough, right? That's what economics predicts. And that's why, there's this book, Nudge, by sort of Thaler and Sunstein, and it seemed to me that you would have started with this example, right? You should have started with this and said, look, I expect us to be able to nudge people around. That is, there's very little reason not to let people nudge you around. There's very little reason not to let them push you a little way this way or that way when it comes to deciding what to buy. It's low cost. I wouldn't expect people. Do I expect people to be perfectly informed? Are they going to figure out whether their true demand curve is here or their true demand curve is there? The answer is no. There's not much incentive to figure out where your true demand curve is, because there's very little loss from being wrong, right? You don't want to make gross errors. On the other hand, the gain to getting your decisions exactly right isn't so great. So that's an important point. Yeah?
Why is this guy not on his demand curve? Is he rational?
Sure. I'm just saying because he's not really learning exactly what his demand curve is, right? I go into this store. I don't really know exactly how good this good is, right? I don't know how nutritious it is. I kind of know, but I don't know exactly. And if I knew more about the good, I could make a better decision. The answer is the gain to knowing exactly how good it is isn't very high. Right? I would love it to be better. If the good was better, I'm much better off. But that's not my choice. The actual quality of the good is fixed. Then the question is how well do I know how good it is? And the answer is I'm not going to get very precise, because the cost to me of not knowing is pretty low. Okay? So we would expect people to run around as very imperfect decision makers. Or at least somewhat imperfect decision makers. That's a prediction of economics. It's not. People take this as like, oh, that's why economics is wrong. In fact, it's the other way around. That's what economics says people should do. That's how people should be. Okay? All right. This is a long-winded answer to